So we're all excited again about the Olympics, but with millions of tourists coming to watch the games, marketers of fast-moving consumer goods products find themselves even more preoccupied on the right pricing strategy to apply to their products. Let us go back to ancient Greece, where, as you all know, the Olympics started, with a philosopher called Plato. He told a story involving a number of people held prisoner in a cave. They're shackled and they cannot move around or even turn their heads. There's a fire behind them, and all they can see are the shadows on the wall in front of them of people or animals passing by the fire. They can imagine what is passing by looking at the shadows, but they can't be 100% sure because they can't see the original source of the shadow. So they make assumptions and use beliefs. Only when they're able to turn around and look at the facts will they know if their assumptions or beliefs were true. Well, this kind of situation happens nowadays as well. A lot of marketers use common beliefs when considering their options and when deciding on pricing, so not just during the Olympics, but on a frequent basis. Skim has carried over 200 pricing studies in fast-moving consumer goods categories over the last 5 years. And what we've done is we created a database with the results from those studies. So this has been used to understand trends in consumer reactions to pricing and price changes between countries, categories, and consumer types. So basically, we have tested the general wisdom about prices against the facts that we have from our database. Firstly, to be clear, there are two terms I'm going to define. We're going to talk about both those terms all along through our presentation. The first one is price sensitivity. Now, what we mean by price sensitivity is how strongly consumers react to a price change of a product or a whole category. They are price sensitive if, when the prices are going up, they switch from one brand to another to get the lowest prices. If consumers on the end are what we call price insensitive, it's because they remain loyal to a brand even when prices are going up. The other important term that we're going to use is price elasticity. That's the measure of what happens to the volume sales of a product when its prices are either going up or down. As an example, let's say a specific product price is increased by plus 1%, and we observe a change in volume sales of minus 1%. Then we'll say the price elasticity of that specific product is minus 1. So we'll be using those terms. I hope they are clear for you. And let's start now with our first common belief about pricing. So we're saying here, German consumers are more price sensitive than consumers in other European countries. Let's put this in an example to make it easier to understand. So let's translate this belief into an example for you guys to really understand what it is about this belief. Just so you know, after I explained this example, we're also going to show you a screen where you're going to be asked to vote whether you think the statement is true or false. You just have to click on the answer that you believe is the right one, and then we'll assess whether you had the right answer or not. So the example is the following. Given the high prices of Olympic souvenirs in London, German consumers will buy cheaper souvenirs than other Europeans. So please vote now and indicate if you think this is true. So do you believe that German consumers are more price sensitive, basically, than consumers in other European countries? So it seems that more people think it is true. And I mean, this question is not to be disrespectful to German people. It seems that it is a common belief, at least in Europe, say that German consumers typically scrutinize prices more than other Europeans. And the general feeling is probably not by accident. It's because hard discounters like Aldi and Lidl were founded in Germany and they're so successful there. So the reality is this belief is false. The fact in reality is that Germans are as likely to buy souvenirs at a given market price as the other Europeans. And the reason why we can say this is that when we compare the average SKU price elasticity, as you can see on this graph, to price increases by country, Germany presents the same price elasticity as the UK, the Netherlands, and France. Actually, we do see that Italy is slightly more price sensitive, and that means that probably Italian consumers might be more looking for cheaper souvenir while they're in London. As for Germans, perhaps you're skeptical about this result. Actually, when we dig deeper, we did see that shoppers at discounters like Aldi and Lidl are definitely more price sensitive in Germany. And that on the other hand, shoppers at regular supermarkets are actually less price sensitive than the average consumer in Europe. So overall, in Germany, because it is in the middle and it's an average of both channels, people are coming up with the same price sensitivity again as the UK, the Netherlands, and France. But you should be aware that there is a polarization in the German market between people shopping in more hard discounters and people shopping in regular supermarkets. Now, what does that mean in terms of action for you as a marketer? Well, what we suggest is that you pump your value-adding innovation into hypermarket and supermarket channels, and you choose high-value for money SKUs to list in discount channels. As consumers react differently to prices in different settings and channels, and more price-sensitive consumers tend to visit discounters more often than price-insensitive consumers, well, you need to consider which product to list in which retail channels to optimize your sales and target the right product at the right consumer.
So let's move on to our second pricing belief. This is the belief that is very common to us. We hear this all the time. And it states that the lower the personal involvement of a category, the higher the price elasticity. But let's start by translating this into an example, so maybe it's easier to imagine. So an example of this would be synchronized swimmers are less price sensitive to waterproof makeup than when looking to buy a burger. So what do you think? Do you think this is true or not? We're going to hold another vote now, ask you to vote. You're going to be seeing a screen now where you can say if you think this belief is true or false. So I see that the vast majority think it's true. Actually, what we see from our database is that it's partly true and partly false. So actually, synchronized swimmers are not very price sensitive to price increases in waterproof makeup. But as for the burger, it kind of depends on how much they're craving it. But let's explain this a little bit in more detail. In this graph, you can see the range of price elasticities when products in each of these categories are priced up. So you can see the 4 categories on your left, and those bars represent the range of price elasticities in each of those categories in all the studies that we did. So each one of them has a range rather than a number. As you can see, the range is quite broad, but there is a picture emerging from this data. Household cleaning products are clearly more price elastic than personal beauty, consumer health, and personal hygiene products. In other words, consumers are more willing to stretch to pay more for products that are close to their skin or used for taking care of themselves. Consumers are less willing to pay more for products being used to clean their homes, their offices, cars, and clothes. So assuming that consumers are more personally involved with products that are close to their skin or for taking care of themselves in more pampering term, then the belief holds true for these products. So looks like most of you were right in these categories. But we also see that for food categories, for example, it shows a much broader range of price elasticity. And much as we have tried, we have not been able to find any patterns dictating which food products will be more or less sensitive beyond the marketing strategies of the companies manufacturing and marketing them. So there is something of a truth behind this belief that low personally involved categories show higher price elasticities if we are willing to exclude all food categories from this statement and define personal involvement as self-pampering and not taking care of them. So what can it mean for your category as a marketeer? So if your category allows for this, it can happen that it doesn't, but if it allows for this, position your product as self-pampering to increase consumers' involvement in your product, and this will help driving down price elasticity and ultimately will enable you to increase prices. So, ready for our third belief?
Our third belief is when increasing prices, you should lose volume at the same rate as the volume you would be gaining when lowering prices. Now with an example, and don't forget you're going to be voting on this one to tell us as well if you think it is true or false. When the price drops 10%, football clubs will buy 112 footballs instead of 100. Conversely, they will buy only 88 footballs if the price rises by 10%. So in other words, a price change of 10%, either going up or down, will lead to a 12% change in volume, again up or down. You can vote now. I'm going to repeat this statement because this one might be a bit more complicated. So when the price drops 10%, football clubs will buy 112 footballs instead of 100. Conversely, they will buy 88 footballs if the price rises by 10%. So it seems everyone thinks it is false, and it is. So, wow, I'm really impressed. People are pretty good. Actually, if we look at the answer, what would be typical if we look at our result is that football clubs would buy 89 footballs instead of 100 if the pricing would be increased by 10%, and they would buy 114 footballs if prices were dropped by 10%. So there is a volume change of 11% when pricing up and 10% when pricing down. Why is this happening? Well, the expectation that we had originally is of a reversed linear relationship between price and volume. So let's say you look at this graph. What was expected at first when we had the belief was this dotted blue line. And in there we would say, okay, we are increasing prices by 10%, so you're moving on the right side of the x-axis. And then you look at your volume and you say it would probably be going down by 12% because you see the dotted line going down. Now for the same product, instead, let's say your price is lowered by 10%, then you would be moving left on the x-axis and your volume would be growing at 12%. Now what Skim Database reveals is that the reality, and you're going to see it now with this orange line, is that the price elasticity of price increases is in fact not as high, it's minus 1.1, as the price elasticity of price decreases, which is minus 1.4. So in plain English, this means that consumers are less sensitive to price increases than to decreases. And it also means that the relationship is not symmetrical. Now, what lies behind those findings? Why is this happening? Well, it's because sales for any one of the products on shelf can be broken down into sales coming from loyal consumers and sales coming from non-loyal consumers, or what we call switchers. Loyal consumers tend to be less price sensitive, where switchers tend to be more price sensitive. So as you increase price, sales coming from switchers will drop. As you decrease price, sales coming from switchers will go up. So sales, loyal consumers will remain relatively stable at the same time, even when there is price changes. Basically, as you decrease prices, what's happening is that the switchers determine a larger part of your product's price elasticity, and the net result is a more sensitive reaction to down pricing than to up pricing. That's all due to the move of those switchers' consumers. Now, as a marketer, what does that mean? What can you do with this finding? Well, first of all, in order to drive trial in a competitive market, you can price your product lower than direct competitors. The only thing is you need to find out which are the right competitors you should benchmark against. The second action you can do is when introducing a new product to compete directly with a brand with high loyalty, introducing it at a lower price will not necessarily drive trial if you don't invest in differentiating it. Communication is key, and even at low prices, consumers still need to believe your product lives up to expectations. And a third action you can do is your ability to price up a product basically is heavily dependent on your loyal consumers, as we've just seen. So strive to build brand equity. Communicating on price only will actually educate consumers to look for low prices. Offering a strong brand at a good price, even if it's not the lowest, is more likely to work better in the long run. All right, so let's move on to our fourth belief.
Thank you, Sam. And in pricing belief number 4, we have one that is very common, and I'm sure you've heard it before as well. It's the idea that it's better to decrease the pack size of a given product than to increase its price. So let's start by putting this in an example, make it easier to understand. So imagine a bottle of water, and in order to increase the price per liter without losing too much sales from Olympic spectators, it would be better to decrease bottle size than to increase prices. So we're gonna ask you to give us your opinion again. You're gonna have the chance to vote if you think this statement is true or false. So you should have the poll in front, and we want to know if you think it's better to decrease pack size than to increase price, if you think it's true or false. We seem to be having a very split opinion in this case. Let's see. Actually, this turns out to be a false belief. Actually, what we found when we compare price and size elasticity in our database is that both strategies lead to a similar change in demand. And now we're going to show you how we approach this. We compare how shoppers react to an identical price change when executed via a shelf price change. So let's say you increase your price to $3.49 to $3.99, for example, but without changing the pack size. And on the other hand, we've also compared this with a pack size change, let's say from 1 liter to 875 milliliters, while keeping the same price. In both cases, you have an increase of about 50% on the per liter price. Now, what you can see on this slide, and in front of you should have a graph that represents the changes in demand as the price per liter changes as well, is that for price increases, so that will be the right side of the graph, the difference in sensitivity between playing with price versus playing with size is not significant. If you look at the right side of the graph, the lines are almost one above the other. So for price decreases, so this would be the left side of the graph, reducing your shelf price is a more efficient way to gain volume. Now you can see this because this is represented by the blue line. This implies that it's better to play with your price than with your pack size, whether you want to price up or price down. When pricing up, actually, both methods are equally effective to sustain volume sales. And if you're pricing down, You will increase volume sales more if you change your price rather than pack size, as a bottle price decrease tends to be more visible to consumers than a pack size increase. Given that changing pack size is a costly business, requiring changes in production lines, manufacturing, and package designs, this is great news for most people, actually. As a final note of cautioning this belief, I would like to add that even though the number of bottles sold is going to be similar, that's just as we said before, downsizing the pack means selling fewer liters in the end. This is, the size change might have a secondary effect that you may not see here. Having said this, we also have seen many cases where this rule doesn't apply at all. There are clear exceptions to this. This is cases of pricing where it's better to actually change the pack size. So cases where downsizing the pack is clearly a better option than taking the price up. Most of these cases involve price barriers or strong category norms towards line pricing. For example, if you have a category in which everything is priced very similarly, then a change in price might be very visible. So category norms on how pricing is presented to the shopper and price barriers in the end means that ad hoc research might be needed to know what to do in your case. So what does this actually mean if you're a marketeer and you're planning to do something with this? Well, it means that in normal situations, the advisable thing is to price up. Downsizing may lead to more volume loss than expected due to the small size of the pack. However, be careful about potentially crossing some important price barriers in your category.
All right, thank you, Mario. We're on to our last belief, belief number 5. And that's price elasticity is higher for larger packages than with smaller packages. An example of this, and again, you will have to cast your votes on it, is around the Olympic Village. It is less harmful to increase the price of a 6-can pack of beer than to increase the price of a 24-can tray of beer. So do you think this is true or not? Please cast your vote now. You should see the screen appearing. Oh, it's 50-50, so people are not really too sure. Well, it's a true statement. So that's great for those of you who had it right. In fact, what we see, if we get back to our example, is that you will lose more volume if you increase the price of a 24-can tray of beer than if you increase the price of the 6-can pack. Now, why is this true? Well, the explanation behind this is that we can see that the price elasticity of large packs is significantly higher than the price elasticity of small sizes. So if you look at the graph here, you see that the large pack size, which is the last row in the graph, has a larger price elasticity than the small packs, which is the first row. So this happens for two reasons. The first one is that typically larger size have higher absolute prices. Obviously, you know, they are larger. So a 10% price change is then much larger in absolute amount than the same relative price change for small size. Consumers are more cautious when they're having to spend a much higher absolute price. The other reason is that because large packs are typically bought already by more price-sensitive consumers, largely due to the fact that they are typically considered a better deal, those consumers will react more strongly to price changes to begin with. So as a marketer, again, how do you work with this finding? Well, there's two things you can do. To drive trial, you can ensure you have an entry size pack at a low absolute price. To drive consumption, on the other end, you need to ensure you have great value for money price positioning on your large pack size. In summary today, we wanted to convey the message of keeping an open mind about pricing your products. So next time you hear, oh, with the current economic climate, now is not the time to launch a premium product, or if somebody says on your team, we can't launch this in Neverland, well, think again.
Finally, we would like to include a word of caution regarding this awesome expression. It's called self-fulfilling prophecies. So what this means is that you can actually influence the price sensitivity of the market by the way you approach your customers. How strangely this sounds. For instance, if you really believe that Germans are more price sensitive than other Europeans, and as a result you only launch low-priced and discounted products in Germany, in the end, you will teach them to look for cheaper products, and you will make them more price sensitive. So in other words, if you believe strong enough that something is true when it comes to pricing, and you act towards it, in time, it will become true. So we have reached the end of our session. Thank you all for the participation. We hope we challenged some of your pricing assumptions today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at SCIM.
Thank you, everyone.